Hello, I'm Carla Machado, Vice-President of Prenatal Alliance and founder and president of ANEP Brazil. That's the National Association for Prenatal Education.
Hello, my name is Laura Uplinger. I am the Vice President of the ANEP Brazil and also on the Board of Directors of Prenatal Alliance. And we're going to introduce you now to a very special theme that is psychohistory. This is our bonus material for our Wellness Prenatal Summit of Prenatal Alliance. So stay with us. We're going to have a journey throughout history and the ways we treated children.
Fasten your seatbelts.
Yes.
Well, the first well-known psychohistorian was Sir Lloyd de Mos. He already passed in 2020. And he was the first one who dared to look at children and how each country, how each civilization was developed in terms of how they treated women and children. So he made this connection between the mortality rate of children in one specific society, correlating that with how this society would be in the future, if they will develop themselves more towards peace or like more war, uh, like a more bellic society. So
Yes. Normally historians, they study how governments go to war, install peace, the way nations live according to economic measures. But psychohistorians only study what happens in the playground, in the nursery, how children are treated by their parents and by societies in general.
and he wrote this book, The History of Childhood, and it's a very unpalatable book because it talks about especially these chimneys, cleaners that used to be tiny, tiny boys. And this is the cover of the book, so you can imagine what is inside.
Yes.
But the way he put it was too heavy, too difficult, not to understand because it was very technical. And then it came Robin Grill, who comes to be a Hungarian, Uruguayan psychotherapist who actually lives in Australia. And he wrote this uh, wonderful book called Parenting for a Peaceful World. It's like a study of the first book of all the work of Lloyd de Mos, but it's more readable. It's easier to understand, although
Yeah,
it's
it's
very
more
thick.
yeah, it's more palatable because he's a psychotherapist. Now, historians, they don't give you their ideas. They give you facts and more facts. So to read Lloyd de Mos is very interesting because he only can say something about facts that you can verify in old documents, letters, birth registry, death registry, the numbers. So it is a tough information that psychohistory gives us.
We have also Sarah Blaffer Hrdy. She is an anthropologist and biologist, and he wrote this book, Mãe Natureza, Madre Naturaleza, that's related of the all the relationship with nature and how people treated themselves, and they are related to the way they treat the earth. and also women. And we know the way women are treated has totally a relationship with the way children are treated, because children come from women. So this beginning, especially pregnancy, that is the major period of the development of a person, the kid, the future adult would be in the mom's belly. So the way
Yes.
the woman was treated will influence a lot in this future adult.
This is exactly what Lloyd DeMose said. I was with him in the 90s at an international congress of APA, the Association for Prenatal and Perinatal Psychology and Health. It was in San Francisco. And there he was, very slim, very tall, with those blue eyes, really engaging. And this was prenatal psychology conference. So he gave us all his ideas about the drama that we live in the womb and how we reenact this drama later on in the ways we play as children. And later, when we assume important places in the government, our nation will be kind of influenced by the way we were treated in the womb, which means by the way our mothers were treated when they were pregnant. Wow, that was an extraordinary experience.
Do you want to present him, Laura?
Well, Ludwig Janus, he's a very important person at the ISPPM, the International Society for Pre and Perinatal Psychology and Medicine, and the enduring effects of prenatal experience. So throughout life, we reenact what we learned in the womb, which is our first school, which means we will be faithful to the biochemical components of love, anguish, enthusiasm, or hope that our mothers had. So it's like an urgent calling. Let's make sure that every pregnant woman on earth is attended in her basic needs, that she does not go through frustrations and violence. Okay? So we look at history books, the world history books. Hello. The cover of such books for high school, they are covered with wars.
It's a shame.
It is a shame, but it's a universal phenomenon. And this is what caught the attention of Lloyd DeMose for psychohistory. How come all this aggression is so easily available? So according to Lloyd DeMose, the evolution of culture is ultimately determined by the amount of love, understanding, and freedom experienced by its children. Every abandonment, every betrayal, every hateful act toward children returns tenfold a few decades later upon the historical stage. Well, every empathic act that helps a child become what he or she wants to become, every expression of love toward children, heals society and moves it in unexpected and wondrous new directions.
And that's the reason why we wanted to present psychohistory, because not because we are like sadistic, but we are trying to put in perspective what happens long term relating to the way we treat children. So Lloyd DeMose divided into six, he classified into six modes of parenting, of child rearing. From violence to harmony. And we're going to present all these six. Of course, they existed in the past, but they still exist in some societies. So we can see some merges between the modes, parental modes, but it's a way he classified. So it's good to understand, to study all these violence and how it became much better with time.
So somebody who's parenting today has this atavic information. How did humanity parent its children until today? All these modes coexist in our subconscious mind. We are all of us informed by what happened there. So this is what we invite you now to discover with us.
Where we came from.
So the
So
first one is infanticidal mode. Here it is, a woman throwing her baby to the crocodiles in the Ganges in India.
and it was predominant until the 4th century before Christ,
After Christ.
AD. AD.
Yeah.
It has been diminishing since the High Middle Ages, but it's linked to uh, assassination as a way of family planning. When people didn't know how to avoid children, they couldn't do that in a preventive way. So basically, the children were born and they were murdered because parents were not obliged to keep a child alive. It was the child belonged to the parents. It was their property, like in
It's
ancient
a
Rome.
staggering. It's a staggering statistics. And we know that the law would grant absolute authority to the father, including the right to kill his own children. And this is the most predominant parenting mode till recently. And it still exists, of course, if we include abortion. But the amount of children who died, you're going to see statistically.
We saw that in ancient Egypt, where illegal infanticide was very common, and even amongst ancient Hebrews, but they were the first ones to forbid this practice. But girls, they didn't consider the same as boys, so girls were still murdered much more than boys.
Yes.
And
Aristotle.
Aristotle said that children were dwarfs with very bad memory. And
Yeah.
Plato instructed uh, parents to identify children who would grow up from those who wouldn't. For example, children of mothers older than 40 or fathers older than 55, they would be like uh, with bad health, with like more weak, and they could die easily in the future. So you should not invest on these children. We should not uh, put uh, give food and take care because they won't be a good um, harvest in the future.
All right. Why bother, right?
Yeah, and also in ancient Rome, Greece, pre-Islamic Arabia, Chinese dynasty, Papua Nova Guinea, the firstborn they was kept, only the firstborn, and the others were given to adoption. But in Papua New Guinea, it's until 1978 it was a practice.
Yes. So we see now that infanticide was not linked to material conditions. It would happen amongst the very rich as much as the very poor. And we can even say that 20% and to, from 20 to 40% of newborns, they were thrown away by their own parents. There were no institutions yet to receive them, and many would die. Others would become slaves, those who could survive. And but nowadays, in rural regions in the world, infanticide rates still reach 40%. You were mentioning Papua New Guinea. Wow. And also during colonialism, all these informations are very clear in the book of Robin Grill, Parenting for a Peaceful World. We're kind of bringing you that kind of information that you'll find there, a book we highly recommend. And the Yanomami in Brazil, an Indian indigenous tribe, well, they still have a highly infanticidal rate.
I just watched a documentary where people arrived in the Yanomami tribe, and there was a baby under the soil. They put uh,
Dirt,
not dirt, assoalho,
a towel.
over, and it was with fixed, and they removed the wood, and the child was there. And if the girl was like 14, 13, and she's, until now, she's sent to the forest to give birth and cannot return with the baby. She should let the baby in.
She abandons the baby in the forest.
Mhm.
And we saw here also that in Nigeria, for instance, and other tribes, they would kill twins. Twins were not considered a good omen. It was not an auspicious sign, so they would eliminate both of them. This is common practice throughout the ages. Now, in Polynesia, they had rituals, even in times of wealth, like in ancient Greece or Rome, and they would sacrifice children. And in the Chinese dynasty, Qing, 18th century, the ratio of boys and girls was about 154 to 100, so from boys to girls. Normally it's 105 to 100. So we know something was happening there. And in India, 19th century, the ratio was 300 boys to 100 girls. And this was on purpose, of course, to diminish the number of heirs. Parents would kill their own daughters, and even when they could easily nourish them. So it was not linked to money.
Yeah, but the Christianity in Europe tried to forbid infanticide, and it began to be stronger. And Martin Luther King, even though he was someone who talked about freedom and
And peace.
racism, he said that children were should be drawn as instruments of devil.
Yeah, the mentally ill children, because that was a
Mentally
manifestation
ill,
of something
yeah.
evil. Yeah.
And in 19th century in France, the Catholic Church forbids the still illegally practiced infanticide. Although it was illegal, it was still practiced.
Yes, underground. And here we have this image of a little one. We have countries like the Congo of Kinshasa where children go to war. Look at how tiny is this little one.
This is
The
a
infant,
recent image of a marriage with children and grow up men. So the infanticidal mode has all this practice, and the impact on the surviving brothers and sisters is difficult to measure. But can you imagine if your parents kill your brothers and sisters? You begin to stay very freeze with a lot of fear and just trying to survive. You cannot really blossom.
yeah.
Uh, and
This all
people,
this research. Sorry, go ahead.
all this research surprised even these historians. They were surprised. People did not feel towards children. the way you feel today. So it looks like it was not the same kind of attachment we are capable of doing nowadays. It was not the same feeling. Maybe because they came from that too. It was very recent for in their memories, so it was normal. And Elizabeth Badinter saw an absence of pain or mourning akin to an emotional atrophy. That's the way
Yeah.
she described this lack of feelings. But nowadays, infanticide is still responsible for 9% of infant deaths. In India, Tamil Nadu, and Rajasthan, breastfeeding is denied to girls, and opium is rubbed on the mother's nipples as well as venom to avoid breastfeeding. Young Hindu widows are burned alive as sati because they could not, society could not take care of them, so they were basically discarded. And also these forced marriages of girls as young as 4 years old, but of course many die for lack of dowry.
Yeah, the parents again, they can kill them. And of course we have the sacrifice to the gods. So children from poor families are bought, and some of them were born for that purpose. So the very pregnancy was to give a child that will be sacrificed. And even in the Stone Age, we found skulls of children given in sacrifice. Anglo-Saxons, babies who cried at birth, they were sacrificed. And it was even a common practice in the Americas among Aztecs, Mayas, Incas, and Mapuches. There's an island called Isla Mujeres in Mexico. Well, it was a place specifically of sacrifices of women, young girls, 10, 12 years old, island of women, which means they died. Yeah, go ahead, Carla.
Until the 20th century, a common practice among African cultures like the Tivi, a Bantu ethnic group, Nigerians, and the Matara in Zimbabwe. It's infanticidal mode. And Hebrews were the first ones to abolish infanticide in the time of Abraham.
And if it were not enough, we have all this chapter of child mutilation, because children have been cut, burned, castrated, circumcised, infibulated, forced to endure severe pain, and often permanently disabled. And today, 200 million women have had their clitoris removed. In China, feet were deformed until 1930. We can see that in the picture. It was considered an element of beauty. It was very refined.
And they could not marry if they had big feet. So they do that. Otherwise, maybe they could die of hungry if they don't marry, because
Yeah.
women receive for work. In the
In the
90s,
19th century in Europe, they would shape the head of the babies with the help of wooden boards so that it had a conic shape. I imagine the pain. But then there's also the castration of boys destined to be used in brothels. It's prostitution. Boys were something you could offer, but throughout many centuries, boys were just an option in the joys and pleasures
menu,
of the flesh.
in the menu.
Yeah. And well, even today, circumcision is seen as a medical preventive practice, although it has been proved that penile cancer still exists with circumcised men. It's hard to take away that. Some rabbis are against circumcision. I have met some in America.
Yeah, sexual slavery and physical abuse is very common also in this infanticidal mode. In Egypt, boys castrated to be sexual slaves, and among ancient Hebrews, a man who loves his children hits them often. It was a way to educate. And we can see also in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, Lot offers his two virgin daughters in sacrifice to appease the wrath of a crowd. Of course, children were not seen as people. They were like something different, another species maybe. And in ancient Greece and Rome, it is considered elegant a boy to accompany a pedophile. He belonged to this man that was at the same time raising him but using him.
Yeah, and Plato and Aristotle advocate the sexual use of prepubescent boys. And girls, of course, were also the temple prostitutes among Hebrews, Sumerians, Persians, Mesopotamians, Celts, Egyptians, Etruscs, people from Carthage, China, Japan, India, Aztec. I mean, the list is interminable. And the infanticidal mode,
Yeah,
well,
we can see the sexual abuse, uh, a hymen that was intact was considered a rare anomaly. That means that children were used very, very young. In India, child marriage until 1929, they created an NGO called Girls Not Brides, trying to make bring consciousness to this practice.
yeah,
And
let them play, let them be children, yeah.
ancient Rome, the child prostitution was overseen by the government, and the first prohibitions began with ancient Hebrews, who condemned men who abused children older than 9.
And this is important because before 9, the child was not considered a person yet. So abuse was not considered abuse. And this was in so many countries. Incest isn't considered a crime until 1908. And up to the 18th century, to sexually abuse girls is quite common. And having sex with a virgin is considered a way to heal from STDs. So it's complicated.
But little by little, Christianity succeeds in reducing infanticide rates and imposes a rigid moral over sexual practice. But these go on in the hiding, of course, with some guilt. It began to appear the feeling of guilty.
Yeah, this we have to thank the Catholic Church. At least that part, they started feeling something strange. It was, they had the guilt. Yeah. Let me get to the next one. Okay. I'm not seeing here. Oh, here. The sexual slavery and physical abuse in this mode. Uh, Only since the 15th century in Europe, violent child abuse cases are taken to court. So you need to have a complete violence. And today, it's considered that 25% of girls, as according to some recent research, would be 60% of those were girls and 45% boys, were sexually abused. In the Philippines, northern Thailand, northeast of Brazil, there's a tourism with child sexual exploitation, and it's tolerated and in some places encouraged. And also, I will have children that I can sell to foreigners, or at least to lend them of course, if they pay me for their sexual pleasure. Now, we have to say that more and more adults find it strange, and there's this association, ECPAT, to end child prostitution, child pornography and trafficking of children for sexual purposes. So
In
ECPAT Brazil.
Brazil, we had recently a case of João de Deus, who was condemned due to this kind of practice.
Well, John of God, as they call him, the great healer, apparently he had those houses near his center where beautiful girls copulated with people from Brasilia, sometimes even from the government, and the offsprings, the children of those unions, were given to adoption, organ transplant, and others. So this is still with us, not to at the proportion that we used to have in the 13th century Europe, but still, since antiquity, this violent mode has been with us.
Now it's the second mode, the abandoning mode. Here is the beginning of places where women could leave the child, the unwanted child, so someone would raise for her. But it's the first places that began with St. Vincent. I think we're gonna show in the slides, Laura.
We are too. You see the little, the woman rings a bell, and then you see a hand receiving the child. So it is anonymous. So this abandoning mode, there's now a first law against killing babies and children. So this is in the year 374. So thanks to the Judeo-Christian ideals. So there comes a canonical decree in the year 906, which will punish severely practices of infanticide, as well as children's death due to negligence. But this is very recent, and at the beginning it didn't take so much, but at least there was a law. They started by there.
In Europe, during the Middle Ages, the ratio between boys and girls jumps from 140 to 100 to 400 against 100 in boys. So society killed much more girls than boys. Boys are allowed to live because they are stronger, they can work, they can go to war, and girls you need to raise with care, and it's difficult to marry them. They want to help their parents. So it's still, since Middle Ages, it was like that, but it's still like that in a lot of cultures. And in Paris of the 18th century, 20 to 25% of babies were thrown away. 1/3 of the middle class and 1/4 children of merchants and artisans. That's the beginning of the middle class. And between 1879 and 1888, 69,000 babies were abandoned in Sicily, but only 15 in Sardinia, a poorer region in which the mothers would stay together in kinship to raise their children. So it was not, again, related to money. It was more related to how society is organized, how people can help each other and give a hand in raising children, and the habits. So the same country, different regions, they could be kinder to children.
Yeah. And this is 19th century. This is tough. Yeah. So we have some historians who tell us from the 14th to the to the from the 4th to the 14th century, that parents would not be bothered with parenthood. I mean, parenting is a lot of work, and John Boswell describes it very well. And Sarah Blaffer Hirdi, the story of our European ancestors, she resumes saying that it is a wide-scale demographic catastrophe of unprecedented dimensions. So again, it was killing more than any war or epidemic. There was a conference in 95 in Durham, England, on child abandonment. It was a common routine all over Europe, and more children died due to abandonment than in all plagues and epidemics. You see, there were no wet nurses enough for all these abandoned children, and they did not know what they could feed a baby. So they would try different potions, like this kind of milk with water, with bread, with wine. And of course, the fact that they were abandoned, there was no bonding with these babies. So the death rate was staggering. And again, let's remember that this information is with us, although we did not read those books. This pertains to our human history. So we are breathing beings, and we're living on the planet that was the scenery for this kind of tragedy for so long.
Well, it continues to the 13th century. The foundling homes with the sick and the ailing, where people stayed together, all the sick people and the
Old
baby.
age.
Yeah. Parents' indifference killed more than any infectious disease. In Florence, during the 14th century, a foundling home received 900 children per year. To 30% of them would die because they didn't have funds, they didn't have a way to raise all of them. And during the 18th century in Sicily, 70,000 babies were abandoned in a span of 26 years. Only 20% survived. And in 1638, St. Vincent de Paul is the first foundling hospital in France to receive abandoned babies. So they have a special place, not mixed with sick people. And in 1741, London opens its first foundling hospital. By 1753, it was receiving over 100 infants per day.
And keep in mind that at that time, hospitals were not places like today. They did not know about bacteria. Adult hospitals, there were many diseased persons in one same bed, even when infectious diseases. So it was such an example of misery, despondency for all these children. And in Moscow, Catherine II, she opened the first Russian foundling homes to remove dying babies from the streets. They would put them one above the other throughout the night. So 99% of the children would die in their first year in those foundling homes. So the abandoning mode did not improve the children's lives, but started a collective guilt about directly killing them because people could see that they were dying. It's very different when it's in a public place or in a hospital than in the privacy of a home.
And it says that Catherine, the Queen of Russia, took them out of the streets because they were bothering. They were like creating traffic in the streets, and even the water when it comes. So it was not because of the babies, but because of the grown-ups that would bother the society in this country.
Yes.
Leaving
There was,
baby at a wet nurse's home where they were swaddled and hung on crooks without being able to move away from the warmth of human contact. Unfortunately, it was very common to have a wet nurse, not in the place together with the family, but away in the house of the wet nurse. And children are considered an embarrassing burden. Mothers fear to lose their beauty, have their breasts mishappen, and be forced to endure their children's cries because um, it was known at that time. It was considered that a woman who is breastfeeding, sex to having intercourse would damage the milk. So if you're breastfeeding, it means that you're not having sex with your husband. So it was a way to show that you have no power over your family, the man.
you're a bad wife, yes. And then your breast will get misshaped. So yeah, it's a lose-lose situation. Yeah. Oh,
And the wet nurses were known as angel makers because most of the children died and in her house, in their houses, because the condition, due to the conditions of health, cleaning,
hygiene.
hygiene, and other too many children. They could not feed all of them, although they were paid for that. But the children that came from outside were mixed with her own children. And
Yeah.
I remember when Bia Fioretti from ANEP Brazil, she made an interview with a wet nurse, and she had a third breast under the arm,
Yeah.
and she gave milk to a lot of children, and she was paid like they give a chicken or they give something like that, but they didn't want her to give milk from this breast, this extra breast, because it was not not healthy. So she reserved this breast to her own child and gave this milk for the good breasts to the children whose parents were paying her.
Oh, this is amazing because um, breastfeeding here we see was more common in Norway, for instance, but still, there were 50% who would die. The mothers who breastfed, they were considered dirty and sloppy. There was this idea in Europe, we're talking about throughout Europe, you had to be a professional wet nurse, so you knew how to. Well, I believe that this painting of Frida Kahlo says a lot. Can you develop a little bit about this picture, this painting, Carla?
Yeah, she herself was raised by a wet nurse, was fed by a wet nurse, was fed, and but the wet nurse was not in love with her. She didn't give her a kind regard, a kind look. So she considered her as a monster, and she drank the milk, but she could not uh, connect, have a bond with the wet nurse. And she was known after as a very sick woman. She had an accident, and but she couldn't really trust life because that's what milk is about. Breastfeeding is about to the way we can trust in life. But if the person who is giving you the milk is not there with you, then it has a break. The food is there, but the love is not there.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're bringing here. If I am a child being breastfed, I'm a 4-month-old baby, let's say, somehow I am learning that there's always something for me. Life will provide. So perhaps it's a good remedy against wild capitalism where people never seem to have enough. Let's have our children breastfed so they will be at peace with life and won't need to be greedy. Yes, in Renaissance Italy, 2 out of 3 babies have a wet nurse and stay 2 years away from home. And the others have a wet nurse but at home. So everybody that they were able to see throughout societies, they were when they were born, they were breastfed by another woman. And now we see bottles arriving made out of cow horns, first baby bottles.
The first sign of improvement in the 17th century was the wet nurse are brought into the home. So the children didn't need to be apart. Of course, the children of the wet nurses, they were abandoned at home. But at least the children who is paid for, she was, attended by these women. I don't know how for how long, but the children were raised in their own houses. But poor mothers breastfed their children, and those were much healthier. So sometimes it's good to be poor so they can
How
stay with the
how
moms. Although,
ironic.
yeah.
Yes, how ironic. Well, same thing happened in so many places of colonialism throughout the world. Yeah, the the slave, the servant had to breastfeed the children of the masters, but then their own.
But by the
Well,
end of this 19th century, breastfeeding makes a comeback in Europe. Of course, we still have a lot of questions about that, but it has returned. Returned, no, I think it has begun because it was never there, and into society
yeah.
we know the history, the Occidental history as we know.
Because we have this coming back in a way, that's what Robin Grill says in Europe, breastfeeding. But at the same time, most children were sent into the service of distant friends and relatives. They started fostering exploitation and child labor. So a child is something cumbersome. My life, I don't have my independence. So this is not so modern. We think it is, but already 19th century we had that. So it was customary to farm out the children. And there was a huge death rate called a mass murder, identified as historical mass murder. Jonathan Gathorne Hardy. And the documents that bring us this kind of information are very simple information. The death, the rate, the farming out, everything is noted, registered. It's not an esoteric information, it's totally out there. That's why we need psychohistorians to tell us our story, because throughout centuries we were abused and we abused. And there was also apprenticeship from the age of 4 onward. You see here children from a temple. But there was this oblation when you hand children over to monasteries, to nunneries, quite common in Europe during the 11th and 12th centuries. And the discipline, imagine hour by hour, I mean, it was very hard. Most of the time it was slave work. But then on the 13th century, there were some changes because school was already open to other children. So parents had abandoned their child in a convent or a monastery in the hopes of that child learning how to read and write. But then school started, so then that kind of oblation practice went down.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Carla.
It starts to change in the 13th century and becomes illegal in Russia only in the 19th century. But sexual abuse, intercourse with a girl younger than 3 years old and 1 day was acceptable when the father allowed it. So because before that, children won't remember, so it's not a problem. And virginity was only valued as a future commercial value.
Yeah, you would sell your daughter.
Mhm.
Look at this picture. Look at these little eyes. This is the ambivalent mode. Ay,
It's the third mode. It emerged around the 14th century in Europe, though abandonments continue until the 18th century, until now. Children are more accepted at home, but under strict control. I will keep you if I can mold you. That's the phrase, the dictate they use it. It is the beginning of protection laws, but we had at that period manuals recommending punishment. Softness is detrimental, as childhood is the vilest and most abject condition of human nature, as mentioned Pierre de Beride. Punishment and beatings happen both at home and at school, and they could even hire professional flagellants if they were afraid or not comfortable of flagelling children. Go ahead, Laura.
yeah. You can imagine the ambivalence in the parent's mind. They want to punish the child, but they don't want to hit them. So they hire a professional just to hit the child and to spank. I mean, all that violence. And of course, there was child labor all over. Chimney sweepers are the main example because they're, as you said at the beginning, they're tiny, so they can go through the chimney. Now, sexual abuse was very high. And one of the excuses is that girls were inhabited by the devil and they would seduce men, all these adults. So the way to get free from the guilt was to kill the child. It was a massacre. If I kill the girl, I will feel relieved from my fault, from my sin.
So this is the fourth mode. It's called the intrusive mode. It's a lot of child labor. Go ahead.
Yeah, so all the other modes go on. You'll see a graph at the end. They all go on, but new ones arrive. So there comes this intrusive mode. And during that time, you see, here's we mentioned the swaddling of a baby that is attached to the wall, hanging from the wall by a hook. This is a Wallapai baby with his mother in Arizona. It was common practice there too.
The intrusive mode starts in the 18th century in Europe, where parents begin to see their children, but not really listen to them. It is the end of arranged marriage, but not in India. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau denounced the wet nursing and also the baby swaddling as detrimental to the children. But he himself didn't raise his 5 children.
Yeah. Yeah,
Rigid
he
timetable.
wrote beautiful books on children's upbringing, but he thought that the state would do a better job at raising his children, so he gave his um, children to the assistance publique, which was an atrocious place to grow up. But the idea was romanticized, we're in the 18th century, that the state knew better.
And also rigid timetable and even enemas, uh, because the clock reigns over the child's needs. And children, of course, feel emotionally abandoned, and physiological methods of control it is common to treat the children. In
Yeah, to threat,
19...
because this was psychology. I will kind of scare you. I could control you psychologically by threatening of horrendous things that could happen.
Yeah, putting fear and yeah, shame. In 1938, only 1938, child labor is abolished, and not everywhere. And can you see the images of some tools to avoid masturbation? And of course, this goes against the children's right to their bodies. And pedophilia continues, sexual baby abuse, and also child prostitution. In 1775, it's the beginning of saying that doctors should see the children. And 1872, it begins the medical branch of pediatrics. Before, it was only for adults.
Yeah.
Go
Now
ahead.
comes another mode, socializing. And I really am always impressed with this picture. Look at the eyes. My goodness, they have to be as little grown-ups, right? It's we don't feel the child in them. And where is the happiness we're used to in children? Well, the socializing mode will do exactly that. Will make the child an instrument that I will present society. So it's from the 19th to the 20th century. And you parents want to make sure that the children are conforming to cultural norms. So there's a moral lens that separates behaviors into good and bad. And the father gets hands-on involved. This is the first time that we could notice that with child rearing. And then, of course, there's less children per family. But go ahead, Carla, because your thoughts on this situation of this mode that still exists today.
Yeah, most of the people who were over 50s, over 60s, today they were raised in this mode. So where parents, of course, they offer more and better quality attention to the children than the predecessor's mode, but it's still not, children were not still seen as children.
Yeah. And society, uh, the rules of society would rule the households in a quite rigid way.
Yeah, have to shape the children. But Freud denounces the devastating psychological impact of sexual abuse in children, and they begin to be heard in court. And the child torture instruments disappear publicly. But I remember a friend of ours, when she was researching about psychohistory, she entered in the Lloyd DeMoss website, and the pictures of these instruments of to torture children, they, it's shown in his website, and this website was full of pedophiles, like visiting, and it was very dangerous. If you enter in this site, it's like you are also, I don't know, connected to these people that could damage your computer. So it is
Yes,
like,
you have all the network of pedophilia and child trafficking. I mean, yeah, there was, it was dangerous, yes.
mhm.
But we have the very first White House Conference on Children. It went on for many years in 1909. And only in 1957 there was a Declaration of the Rights of the Child. So 9 years after the Declaration of Human Rights. And in 1989, there was a convention at the UN on the rights of the child. So this is very recent. I remember I was pregnant. I was giving birth that year in '89. And when I was pregnant with my child, I knew about this convention that was being prepared, like a big to-do, international meetings in Madrid, in Geneva. And finally, we, in this socializing mode, is when we see protection laws against genital mutilation in some part of the world, not all the parts. And also something started to appear, like furniture, toys, parks, designed specially for children.
Yeah. And family could go to places together. Like it's not something that children were a part of the family. The family could spend the weekend together in somewhere.
Yeah.
But it's still limited self-expression for children, little value placed on children's feelings, and the child's inner world is seen as trivial and irrational, and therefore of little worth.
Yeah.
Far,
Children don't really count. Remember those sentences? Children should be seen but not heard. Well, this is what we have here. And we'll have to wait till the end of the Second World War, especially in America, to see children having a place of their own. But still, in this socializing mode, we do have a far greater range of self-expression and liberty than ever before in history. But still, parents were advised not to cuddle up with a crying child, because this could be detrimental to the child. And a baby's total dependence um, is not anymore seen as an abject thing. That was the main unsettling dimension of babyhood. This being so dependent. The word that they say is abject. We understand now the bonding process that happens, how the dependent child needs the parents and the wealth of this relationship at that time. But before, it was considered something horrendous.
children are seen and heard in this socializing mode, but not taken seriously. But in 1962, there was a book from Henry Kemp, an American pediatrician, Henry Kemp. He published The Battered Child Syndrome. So it was so common to have this past of a child who had been beaten that he even created the name of a disease. But
Yes,
it's
because of the post-traumatic
stress
stress
disorder.
disorders that would, yeah.
But
It's
it's
somebody
still
who was bitten.
controlling instead of understanding.
Yeah. Go ahead.
3 behavior control methods: corporal punishment, shaming, that's the equivalent of psychological spanking, and also psychological manipulation.
Yes. I
It's
remember
where
Thomas Verney,
it
one
comes
of the
from.
founders of prenatal psychology. Of all these, my goodness, shaming is so detrimental. And you will see many adults today going through life and needing therapy with that specific part of they were shamed in public or just in front of other members of the family. The shaming in the very young child does so much damage, no?
And it's hard for parents who come from this socializing mode to raise children in the new mode. Go ahead, Laura.
So all this manipulation remains with us throughout life. You're a psychotherapist, Carla. You can sometimes understand in your patient who's an adult how those wounds come from early childhood and this kind of parenting.
Yeah, and this lack of bonding since birth, because this is the beginning of C-sections and the bottle feeding. We lost a big period of time where people were not, they changed. I remember my mom, she came out of the hospital when she gave birth to me with a bottle and the powder milk with in her bag. But fortunately, she threw it away, but it was given to mothers. And of course, if you are a mom and you want to give your best, the best for your child, especially if you don't have conditions. So if they offer you a product, so you're gonna, oh, this is very good. And then
Yes. And
after,
we can,
it's
sorry.
difficult. It's difficult to breastfeed when you begin with a bottle.
Of course, you'll have a nipple confusion, yes, but we understand, seeing what we have seen until now, how mothers flocked towards formula for babies because it would be a way not to need the networks and not to need to breastfeed. So at the time, science would say that the milk they would produce was better than the milk the human body would produce. This was in the 50s, and when Henri Nestlé came with this formula, it saved all the foundlings. It saved so many kids who didn't have their mothers. But then, without any kind of TV propaganda yet, it was a huge success, the formula. And of course, then other catastrophes due to of course, when the water was not good enough, was not boiled water. I mean, they had tragedies, but that's another part. Um, Now, we are having in this socializing mode a huge demotivation to breastfeeding, thanks to the bottle feeding, but also sexual abuse and pedophilia. 1 out of 4 children are abused. And go ahead, Carla.
From 1960, 50s to nowadays, 4,450 priests in the US were accused of child sexual abuse.
There was a movie about that, Spotlight. It won the Oscar that year when these priests were finally discovered. But boy, oh boy, that was a tough moment. It was 87, I remember. I was I was in the east coast of the US when all the scandal happened.
Yeah, but masturbation stops being forbidden. It's the beginning of the child as a person with his or her own needs and rights. But until today, it continues to guide and inform most parent-child relationships. And the next mode you're going to see now is the result of significant advancements in the way we understand what helps children to grow emotionally healthy.
And before we go to the next mode, we want to give you a word about swaddling because it's coming back. Many are recommending because the child does calm down, it's true, and sleeps more. What parents sometimes don't know is that the child is just, I mean, it's such a torture for the child not to be able to move, as movement is the expression of life. They kind of disassociate, they go away from the body. That's why they sleep more. And but doctors like Professor Nicholas Clark from Southampton University, he keeps telling parents hips, in order for them to develop well, the legs must be able to bend and extend up and down. And the arms too, right, Carla?
Yeah, exploring the hands is a big part of even developing the vision, the sight, the
Yeah.
capacity of seeing, because they don't see too far. So if they are swaddled, they cannot play with their hands or suck and learn about themselves. They are more like an object because they don't move. They can only cry.
Yes, and they have filmed these apparently random movements that children do with legs and arms as the mother is speaking to them, for instance. Well, they are taking in information, and those movements are not at all random. It's engraving. Their brain is developing new synapses, new communications there in the neurocircuitry. And the level of intelligence, the use of their own brain is made much easier and much more available when they have freedom of movement. And of course, the midwives, um, the Royal College of Midwifery, the Institute of Child Health, University College in London, which is a public research university in London, they all saying careful with that swaddling. At least make sure it's not most of the time. Because if you earn peace of mind during this little time, the price will be very expensive later on. And now comes this mode, Carla. Back to
Yeah,
you.
this is the sixth, the helping mode. That's what we are entering now. Maybe we have already entered, but still a lot of work. It started in the 60s. It's an explosion of interest in early childhood development. In 1956, it took place the creation of La Leche League. In 2004, there were still, although we had the La Leche League in 1956, in 2004, there was still 1 million deaths due to inadequate baby feeding. So it's not solved the problem, but it's trying to solve. And in 1960, John Bowlby develops his theory on bonding, immunity, and breastfeeding. So he connects the force, the immunity in the child to the breastfeeding, to the fact of she or he being breastfed. And
Yeah,
there,
just John Baldy. It was a prince, really, who came and spoke about the importance, what so many knew already, but still, he came and gave names to what it means to love, to cherish, to be tender with a baby.
but it's still difficult. I have a friend, she was breastfeeding in a pub in London, very, very dark place in the bottom of the pub, but it came close to her, an old lady, and she was breastfeeding her baby, and the old lady came with, "What a shame, what are you doing? It's a public place, blah, 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 blah." We have seen these in Brazil too.
Yes,
And
in airplanes, I remember there were some who were sent away. Yeah. Now, this helping mode brings something that is wonderful, less emphasis on social rules. So this lady who's shouting at the breastfeeding woman, they're disappearing. You will still find some of them, and in Brazil, I know there are big mamasso when many breastfeed women they go into a public place and they breastfeed. They are showing, look what we can do. We can bring health to our own children with our own very substance. This is fabulous.
yeah, and it began also the recognition and to attend children's physical and emotional needs, and the natural parenting movement. That means humanized childbirth, even home births, breastfeeding on demand, co-sleeping, and ways to help kids discovering their own talents. So the children, they bring something with them, and we have to listen. We have to help them to develop what they bring, instead of adapting children to the current world so they can work in this world, but what they bring in their souls. That's a totally different perspective. And lots of manuals begin to be being published to nurture children's emotional intelligence. Emphasis on strong rather than violent boundary setting and empathic listening.
Yes, I remember there's a book, How to Speak So That Your Children Will Listen. It's
And how
of
to
course,
listen to your children can speak.
yes, this is wonderful. That
That's
is
very,
the perfect example of the gifts of that helping mode for our societies. But we still have challenges. We are still outsourcing um, child rearing. We have daycare centers. We now have surrogate mothers. Um, we have wombs. We have this huge social pressure for women to go back to work, and also that fear, if I give up my job now and I stay 2 3 years with my child until he or she goes to school, will I find a job later on? So much was invested in university, in this college years, and they often speak about quality as a substitute for quantity, but we don't know about that yet. Of course, there is progress, but quality time is used so much. We still don't have the results of a society where parents have so little time with their children. And now we have this new abandonment in favor of social media and the parents' peer orientation. But the others would tell me, I might try with my children. I want to be well seen. I will not breastfeed like this or like that, and I will respect the time. You know, there's breastfeeding on demand that is so important. Not every mother feels comfortable for doing it, and not every pediatrician will advise that.
yeah. Children now, they are sometimes being abandoned to themselves, like if they should know what is better for them. But this is not also true as the infanticide and the intrusive and the uh, so, so, so what's the name of the last one? Societary
Uh,
sociability.
yeah, yeah, the
It's
social
not
mode.
yet. The children
Socializing, yeah.
socializing. They are not yet ready to know what is good or bad for them in a way that they could command the house. So we should not put of course, the needs of the child, the real needs, they should be uh, prioritized. But we should not put the child in the center because otherwise they will feel lost and they will think that we are lost. So we have to put the values in the center. What is valuable for your family, like honesty. Imagine if my child, she wants something that the other person have, but so we can just take that from the other because she wants that, but it's a rob. It's she's stealing something from the other. So what is more important? What is priority? The children
Yes,
get what he needs, he wants, or to obey a value, a high moral value that do not stole anything from others. So it's a kind of uh, tricky situation we are seeing now because we have seen tons of permissivity that goes in the name of positivity raising mode, and it's not. So we have to be very honest because sometimes we feel so much pain in ourselves due to the way we have been raised that we tend to over liberate to give an
yes, it's true.
extra
But
freedom.
but even something we say automatically. I remember Marcy Axness. the author of Parenting for Peace, saying that, okay, it's a little word that is very toxic. We're going to visit grandmother, okay? There's no okay, there's no question. We're going to visit grandmother. The child is 3 years old. Leave him or her free from the burden of the decision. So it goes very deep in the psychology of the child. You, parent, have your own center and let the child be your satellite. And perhaps understanding that, oh, mommy has a center. One day I'll have mine too. This is the beginning of a very healthy parenting. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, this is an interesting graphic. The infanticidal is all through these ages, and
Mhm.
abandoning, ambivalent mode, intrusive, socializing, and helping. It's still a small part of society who has entered this era of I'm responsible for the development of this child. Let me set him or her off towards life more equipped, more happy with internal references that are healthy. But it's happening. This is a graphic identified by Lloyd DeMose. You have something to say, Carla?
Yeah, we have to update the chart because it ends on the 20s,
Yeah, yeah.
2000.
We should
So
channel Lloyd DeMose to say, give us the.
we must have more
Yes.
research, more recent researches.
But in psychohistory, as we said at the beginning, it's all been recorded, all the notes taken. So this is the result of an immense amount of research, very meticulous one, not just an impression, not just a story I heard, but it is very well fundamented.
Yeah, abandoning mode, for example, if you leave your child 7 a.m. at the daycare and you pick her up at 7 p.m., it's an abandoning mode.
Yeah.
It's not, you know. So
Yeah,
we
and
have
the
to be
child does
very
not have a concept
honest.
of time and space. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, we have to be very honest
Yeah.
on looking at the way we raise our children.
Yeah, so
So
psychohistory teaches us many lessons. Read the first one, Carla.
when facing a social problem, we must check how children were treated during the last 30 or 40 years. A
Yeah,
nation
this
does not
is,
become, huh?
no, that's correct. Yeah, I was amazing, but yeah.
Yeah, a nation does not become belligerent or pacifist thanks to its genetic makeup. But both patriarchal and matriarchal authoritarianism predispose to violence. It's not only because of men that we tend to think men are more, they are stronger and they're more violent. No, when we had matriarchal societies, we also had violence. And the legislation bill will not suffice to change a society or a culture.
Yeah, will
Suffice.
not suffice, which means it has to be a complete new understanding, not just a written law, which is wonderful that a law can exist, but we need a conscious of all this mode. Perhaps the arts, perhaps the movies, perhaps the TV series. We know so much about prison, what happens in prison, with the prisoners, what happens with detectives, with the police. We have an extraordinary instruction from TV series of what is the world with the police or the hospitals. Look at Grey's Anatomy. We know so much thanks to these series. Now it's time to know about child rearing practices and all the dilemmas they bring. And because we need to change culture. So we can say, affirm with a very much clarity, the history of childhood is a nightmare from which we have only recently begun to awaken. And the further back in history, the more likely children are to be killed, abandoned, beaten, terrorized, and sexually abused. So, in a way, human history is a big holocaust against children and against ourselves.
I
We're
was shocked
all,
when I read this word Holocaust that Robin Greer wrote, but that's true. That's true. But we are collectively learning how to set limits to children without corporal punishment, shaming, or manipulation. That was part of the socializing mode. And how parenting skills can and should be taught. That's what we're trying to do a little bit today. That's what we do at Prenatal Alliance. How can we together understand uh, ways to raise children since preconception? And every human being has the potential for profound love and devotion. It all depends on how they were raised. And
yeah, it is control versus contact.
yeah,
And to
we
give up controlling, oh boy, we need more consciousness.
and we need more contact. We need to be with the children. We need to be present for them. So there are still many challenges, but we are making progress. We have a friend who created this name for a new species that should be the species that can come after these changings, where we can really consider children as a priority. It would be the Homo sapiens frater.
Yes, now anthropologists say that we are Homo sapiens sapiens. So this psychiatrist said, well, let's take away one of the sapiens, which means wise, and we're not that wise yet, and let's bring frater, which is the brotherly attitude, fraternal attitude. And it's something that only depends on us. It doesn't depend on economical changes and advanced technologies. No, we can be fraternal to all. And it's a decision that we make inwardly and can be applied instantly. Okay, so what a joy to have been with you sharing these news, because they're horrendous news, yes, but we can analyze them and we can go forward with much more wisdom and clarity, and I hope with much more
Congratulations.
love.
Congratulations if you could stand until the end, stay until the end. But we are sure that by knowing this, we can improve in many ways the way we bring children to the world. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and have a great Prenatal Alliance Summit.